Hola, everybody. Welcome to the Chats with Yvonne podcast with me, your host, Yvonne, where we talk about public speaking con cultura. I was thinking the other day, when was the last time that I cried? And I realized that there have been many moments where I wanted to cry, sure. But the very last time that I remember actually crying, o sea, tears coming down my eyes, was during a speech that I gave. And I want to talk to you about that. But I also want to address one of the most common questions that I get, and that is, what if I cry when I'm on stage? What do I do? How do I react? How do I practice for that? Can I even practice for that? So this episode is going to be dedicated to all of my chillonas out there. It is our strength. It is our connection to self and to our audience and the world. Ser una chillona aquí se vale. Before we get into that, as you all know, we always start off with pulling from the Public Speaking con Cultura practice card deck, which is the deck that I created to help you practice your public speaking wherever you are. Today, we're going to pull from the affirmations deck because I feel like it just makes sense. I am deserving of all opportunities that come my way. Merezco todas las oportunidades que se me presenten. And I'll leave it at that. I ask that you engage in a bit of a reflection on that affirmation, repeat it as many times as you need, and then convert it into a question to identify where you are as far as internalizing that affirmation. That always helps me make sure that I'm not just using affirmations as a band-aid when I need them, but that I'm also healing the wound and addressing where maybe lack comes from, or if I am already in a place where I feel like the opportunities that I've gotten and the ones that are coming my way, I deserve those. There's no other way that I could actually start this podcast episode on crying without sharing this particular story. And that is that I don't know how many of you know, I think I've shared it a couple times on the podcast before, but when I was in middle school, I received a scholarship to go to a private middle school, full ride. Felt very out of place. Eventually loved it. We won't go into the details of that. But one of the really cool things that I remember about it, and that I always thought to myself, everybody not deserves, but everybody should experience their learning in this way, is whenever we were learning about something in class, we would actually go to the spaces to immerse ourselves in that thing and identify what we were seeing in the classroom out in the world. That is such a huge, I think, advantage to learning that a lot of low income schools, public schools, just don't get. And so I was very privileged in that way to be able to go to a private middle school and get this immersive education. Anyways, for that reason, we took many trips. Our 8th grade trip was to New Mexico. And first of all, after visiting, I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to go to college here. I want to move here. I don't know why. I just felt so connected. And I'd never been to New Mexico before. O sea, me encantó. I don't know what it's like to live there. I've never actually gone back. I would love to. We visited White Sands, which is so beautiful. It's crazy. The pictures look like you're out in the snow, but you could be wearing a tank and shorts because it's so hot. That's how much I loved New Mexico. And I always remember this. We had a tour on an indigenous reservation. I have many thoughts about that, but one of the things that our tour guide said to us while we were looking over a mountain was, mind you, we're little 8th graders, right? Said, do you know that feeling you get in your throat when you really want to cry, but you're holding your tears in? It aches. It truly hurts you. It's a physical pain that you feel in your throat. And you're reacting to that pain because it hurts so much to keep the tears in. And he said, tears, that salt water is meant to be released. It's not meant to be held in. It's meant to be out in the world. It's meant to be released by you so that you are no longer hurting. And that stayed with me forever. Because I'm the oldest sister. I grew up in the Latino household, and just crying, showing vulnerability isn't always a good thing, Or rather, it's just not done as much. We have not often had the spaces where we can cry freely and there isn't some kind of negative repercussion from doing so. And in that moment, I think I attached myself to that because I've used it ever since. Every time that I feel like crying and I try to hold myself back for whatever reason, I tell myself, it is meant to come out. It's hurting me more to keep it in. Why am I putting myself through this pain of holding in my tears when my body is quite literally telling me to release them? And that's how I want to start today's podcast episode, because I know that when we go on stage and we tell our beautiful stories, while they are beautiful, there is also so much hurt sometimes and so much pain or so much passion. Thinking about your loved ones, thinking about those who have impacted your life the most, depending on what kind of audience you're speaking to, it might elicit some kind of emotion as well. All of that plays a role in how you communicate and how you deliver. And I think we all have the misconception that I shouldn't cry while I'm on stage. That's not going to help me while I'm on stage. It's not going to do what I want it to do. I don't want to cry while I'm on stage. And I get that because I don't like crying on stage, pero a veces pues se me sale. And I want to talk about what I do in the moment as well as what I do beforehand and why crying is okay. If it happens, it happens. But if you don't want it to happen because you think it's going to impact the way that my message lands, whether in a negative way or in a way where it's less impactful, then we'll talk about that too. I'll give you some facts about crying, and then we'll end with our Con Cultura segment, like always. All right, so most people say, I fear public speaking, and I'm like, I fear crying. And I want y'all to know this, that as much as I am going to walk you through crying in public speaking and how it can actually be the thing that connects you to your audience the most in the moment, it is still very hard for me because crying equals vulnerability. Vulnerability is hard to do, especially if you really think about it. You're speaking to a room full of strangers. If our entire lives we've been told not to cry or to hold it in, or que ya estás grande, no llores. No llores porque I'm going to do something to make you cry for reals. At every single point, we're told to suppress emotions, whether that's good or bad, right? I'm not here to say that. What I'm here to say is that we have a lot more practice holding those tears in, linking weakness with crying, than we do linking it with strength or releasing it. So of course we're going to fear the thing that we don't often know, right? You fear what you don't know, and you don't know what you don't know. Obviously, we know what crying is. We know what crying feels like. But crying in front of people, or crying as a result of something that you're saying and sharing with people, that we don't have as much practice in. Especially as a mujer, as a woman. If you cry in that boardroom, if you cry during your speech and you want to be motivational, there are some assumptions that audience members can make. There are assumptions about leadership that people can make. And so, of course, we're not going to want to cry or show emotion because time and time again, we've been presented with the type of evidence that tells us that crying is not good, that you should not cry in front of these people, that crying is weakness, that if you cry, that means you're too emotional to be a good leader. If you cry on stage, let's say, for example, or during a meeting, it can be perceived as you lost control and you're letting your emotions take over. First of all, as if that's a bad thing. And second, the link between lack of control and showcasing emotion is actually, I think, something that we really should reflect on, both in how we perceive emotion and also how we embody emotion. I have a friend, her name is Janitza, and she always says something that sticks with me, and that is, I'm not afraid to show emotion because I'm human. I'm not afraid to cry in front of people. And I think that's so beautiful. And I always try to remind myself of that we're all human. We're living this human experience, and the human experience requires that every once in a while we're going to cry, especially if we're telling our stories. And I respect her so much for that because it requires, again, vulnerability. And it also requires you really knowing yourself as a speaker. For example, there aren't many situations where I want to cry in public or during a speaking engagement. And so, if I know that I don't want to cry in this situation, if I have assessed that this room is maybe not a safe space for me to cry, then I won't talk about the thing that I know is going to make me cry and emotional. I'll talk about it just enough to provide detail as a part of context in my story, but I won't provide the full detail or spend too much time there because it makes me emotional and it makes me want to cry. Though, this reminds me of the last time that I cried. At the beginning of the episode, I mentioned that the very last time that I cried was during a speaking engagement. I was delivering a workshop for Café Todo Mujer. If y'all were there, you know I got a little teary-eyed. And I was delivering this speech in public for the very first time. I think I had shared this particular speech with members of my virtual workshop before when we were talking about storytelling like our abuelitas, because I created it based on the framework that I provided and I wanted to share it with them. And this was the first time that I shared it live. I already knew I was going to cry. I knew it was going to make me emotional. But I felt in that space, not only did I feel safe to be vulnerable, but I also felt like my crying wouldn't be seen as weakness, wouldn't be seen as a loss of control of my emotions. It would actually lean on being more impactful because this way people can feel what I'm saying. And maybe I'll share the speech in a different podcast episode and dedicate it to storytelling like our abuelitas. But it's really about where I learned to be a public speaker, why I founded Latina Presente, and where my storytelling framework comes from. And it involves my mom, and it involves the stories that my abuelita told. And so I shared from the perspective of being sent to Mexico when I was not sent off like that, but when I was sent to Mexico every summer to visit family. I would listen to stories about my mom that I could not and would not hear anywhere else but directly from my grandma. Because when we're in the States, it was always trabajo, 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 no había tiempo para nada. I was in school, my mom was at work, I was home, my mom would go to her other job. So there really was not a lot of time for stories except in those little pockets of time where we got to spend some time together. And so my abuelita's stories became the foundation for me getting to know my mom a lot more, but forming the foundation for what I would later realize is my public speaking storytelling framework. I'll share that with y'all later, but that really made me cry because I'm about to cry right now. Because you really love, because these people are important in my life. They have greatly impacted the way that I not only navigate the world, but the way that I communicate within it. And when I think about that and the links to what I do today, I'm like, wow, y'all couldn't have given me a better gift. My mom gave me the gift of life, who was gifted to her by her abuela. And y'all gifted me storytelling. You gifted me this beautiful art that now I get to do every single day. And that I'm forever grateful for. So claro que voy a llorar. Claro que sí. But in that moment, it might actually help my delivery. So that's always something to keep in mind. Because is crying not a sign that the story matters? That at the very least it matters to you? And that if it matters to you, it might actually matter to someone else. It might actually be needed by someone else. Your tears are not a sign of weakness. Your tears are not a sign of loss of control of your emotions. Tears are not meant to be contained. They're not meant to be kept in. They're meant to be let out just as much as your stories are. That's how we make change in the world. It's how we connect with one another and how we continue our impact. Don't be afraid to cry. It's okay to cry. And I'm saying this to myself too. Practice that vulnerability. And that brings me to the next point of, it sounds so weird to say, but practice crying. And here's what I mean by that. When you've developed your speech, you know the things that are going to get to you. You know where you're going to get emotional, and it's okay to. Prepare for those moments. Give yourself a one-liner to say while you're on the spot. Something like, this makes me really emotional because I love them. Or take a moment to pause during your practice and ask your audience. I'm going to ask for you all to take a deep breath with me. And then continue on. When you practice for that emotion, you're able to, in the moment, because you're not necessarily on stage yet and feeling the pressures of an audience watching you, in that practice mode is when you're able to implement certain things to help you in those moments. Porque, por ejemplo, cuando estamos on stage, you're not going to think about that one-liner on the spot. You're not going to think about, okay, let me ask my audience to take a deep breath with me so that I can also bring myself back to center. You're not going to think about all that. So it's in the practice where you're maybe a little bit more calm or don't feel the pressures of people watching you, that you can practice for those very moments. If I know that talking about my abuelita and my mom in this particular section of my speech gets to me, what am I going to prepare for in that moment? Record yourself speaking so that you can actually see what your body and your nonverbals are doing in this moment. Is what you're doing when you start to get emotional, does it communicate this care and deep love and passion for the subject? Does it maybe communicate that you're avoiding being vulnerable? That's something I do. I think when I started crying at that last event, I looked at my audience sideways. I did a little one of those looks that's like, it's coming. It is coming. And I don't know if that helped my delivery, right? Could have been more impactful if I just let myself be in that moment. Stared at my audience. Well, not stared, but looked out into the audience. And do the thing where I look at people, but I don't look at people, especially in those moments, because it still is very uncomfortable to be that vulnerable for me in front of people. It's like even in this audience where I know and love most of the people there. When you record yourself, you're able to identify those strong feelings. You're able to study yourself in those moments. And it's not to dilute the message, and it's not for the purposes of not crying, but it's for the purposes of managing your emotions when you are on stage so that you can keep going, so that you don't feel kind of distraught by it or unprepared for it. Because when we are unprepared for these emotions to show up on stage, kind of like when we go blank and forget what's coming next, or when a tech malfunction happens and it kind of throws us off, crying can also do that because, again, it feels vulnerable. It's not part of the script. You're not inserting in your speech, cry. It just kind of happens because of the nature of what you're talking about. So prepare for these things as much as you can when you are not surrounded and there is no pressure of being in front of an audience. Y sí, somos chillonas. We feel deeply. That's the most beautiful thing about storytelling, is that because we feel so deeply, we can communicate that same depth to our audience. We can communicate the same thoughts and ways of thinking and perspective and get them to also tap into themselves. And it's such a beautiful thing to be able to do this. Está bien ser una chillona. And I'm a Cancer, y'all. Like, I am passionate. I don't cry a lot these days. But ya me hace falta. Ya me hace falta llorar. I need to cry. I need a crying session. And just for fun, because I want to normalize crying for you, for me, for all of us, I want to share some facts about crying. Number one, humans are the only animals known to produce emotional tears. Other animals shed tears only for lubrication or cleaning, but humans cry as a response to emotions. Yo, we're so special. We are so special. We cry because we have emotions. We are emotional beings. That's so beautiful. I love that. Like, we don't need to cry to clean our eyes, but we need to cry to release all of those emotions that we carry. Tears have different chemical compositions depending on why you're crying. So, kind of like with public speaking, it is always important to assess why, where, how you're crying at any given point of your speech during that practice portion of it. On average, women cry about 5.3 times a month, while men average 1.3 times a month. That is so interesting. And I'd love to, because by the way, these are just random facts that I pulled up on Google, but I would like to understand where the studies came from, who they polled, and why they cried. Why, when, how they cried. I have some thoughts around that. Tears can actually help kill bacteria. They contain lysozyme, an enzyme that helps fight infection. I totally did not say that right, but see, crying is a good thing. Crying can improve communication and connection. It can serve as a nonverbal cue to show vulnerability or signal a need for support. Communication and connection is the name of the game in public speaking. And crying can be one of the ways that you create this connection. I don't like to call it a tool or something that you use to connect with people, because I don't think it feels icky to say that. But I want you to know that for the purposes of this, if you ever feel like the tears are coming, it is okay. That's the message I want to leave you with. In Japan, there are crying clubs, events where people watch sad movies together to relieve stress through group crying. What? That is so cool. Can we get together and do that, y'all? That would be so much fun. Crying and fun. But I think we all need those spaces. We don't have spaces to cry often. And again, like I said in the beginning, if we practice crying more often, every day, everywhere in our lives, it becomes more normal to us when we are on stage. Tears contain natural lubricants, so even just a few tears can actually be doing your eyes a lot of good. So cry, se chillona, llora, find time to cry. It's a good thing. To end with our segment, con cultura, I wanted to give you an example of someone that I think did really well at managing the emotions. And when I say managing the emotions, I mean going through them and continuing to speak and continuing to share their message. And it's Miss Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And it's in 2020 when she gave a speech because a congressman, Ted Yoho, said some foul things to her. And I wrote this particular piece down because there's a moment in time, if you look up the speech, there's a moment in time, she's emotional throughout the whole thing. And by the way, when I say emotional, I don't mean crying, right? But she's emotional throughout the entire thing. And it's in this very specific part where she says, I have to show my parents that I am their daughter, and that they did not raise me to accept abuse from men. Prior to that, she talks about her father not being here, her mother being here to witness how crazy that congressman was talking to her and how disrespectful he was. She got teary-eyed in those very moments, and it's something that I've noticed we all do, right? Especially, I think our parents, our loved ones are a soft spot for a lot of us. They create these emotions that come out as tears oftentimes. And you could see that she got really emotional during this time, or not really, that's not the right word, but she got emotional during this time and continued through. I would love for you to go watch this part of it and notice. I we'll find the timestamp here if you don't have time to watch the entire thing, but the entire thing is great. But I'll show you the exact moment that I'm talking about in the notes of this podcast episode. And I want you to just pay attention to the transition. What kind of emotion is being evoked? What does her voice sound like right before she starts talking about her father? Notice how her voice shifts, her eyes start to tear up. There's a little bit of shakiness in there, but still stable, still at the same time stability. And then once she finishes talking about her mom and her dad and witnessing someone talk to her in that way, she gives us the lesson. And that's like her finding her strength again, right? It's saying she's grounded in, I have to show my parents that I am their daughter and that they did not raise me to accept abuse from men. Taking that power back again, in case anybody in the audience thought these are moments of weakness. It's not, first of all, but also it's not. She reclaims that narrative and that power in that moment and allows for her emotion to carry her through and make that line even more impactful. Because speaking is a powerful tool for dissent. Public speaking is not just about sharing our story for the purposes of motivating or inspiring people or showing people that there's a way to do things differently. But it's a form of dissent. It's a way to transform the world. Public speaking is advocacy. It should be used and leveraged in those moments where we want to make it known that we don't take this kind of stuff from anybody. When we want to make a point, when we want to change the world, systems, communities. Public speaking is such a powerful tool, and crying can be your strength. With that being said, y'all, thank you so much for joining me in this podcast episode. I appreciate you spending some time with me. You didn't have to, but you did, and I thank you for that. If you liked this podcast episode, please like it. Speak your mind in the comments. Let me know what you thought about it. Subscribe to the podcast. Rate the podcast if you feel like it. I would appreciate it. And share this with somebody. Share this with someone that may be a chillona or maybe isn't a chillona. Share this with everybody. Share this with someone you think could benefit from listening in. Thank you all so much for tuning in y nos vemos a la próxima. Bye, y'all.